So, out of all of the myriad topics that I thought about talking about today, I figured and finally settled on I would talk about um, sort of the gun rights, gun control debate conversation. Now, I don't own any guns personally, so I don't have anything invested in it at this point, but I do know some people who own guns, and I know it's important to them. And I've thought about getting a gun at some point in the future, probably recreationally, not necessarily for personal or self-defense. It's just not something that's high on my priorities right now. I don't plan on living anywhere particularly dangerous, and I think, in my opinion, the theology is kind of iffy, and I'd rather err on the side of caution on that one. But I've been doing some research just because I'm interested in the topic, and I've found some, what I think are some pretty good representations of sort of both sides of the argument. On the one hand, you have people who say that if we decrease civilian access to firearm ownership, that will decrease gun violence, and that will make the world, and specifically the United States, a better place. And you have people on the other side who say, not only is that not true, but I have the right to own guns. The Second Amendment guarantees me personally the right to own a gun. I have the right to self-defense, and things of that nature. And I think both of those kind of positions are a little iffy. As far as the right to self-defense goes, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I suppose you could work the right to self-defense into that. Right to bear arms, a well-regulated militia. That one, again, that's vague. And when you talk about original intent, you get onto all kinds of problems, because those guys died like 200 years ago, and if you know anything about their personal politics, original intent just gets really iffy. And there's a lot of other places where we've tossed original intent out the window, and so I don't really think that it's necessarily the best thing to go off of. But I will toss out some statistics at you, just so we can talk about this in sort of concrete terms. In 2007, 55% of all firearm-related deaths were due to suicide. 55%. Which I find to be interesting. I think that's interesting. I think that's something that a lot of people don't know, is that the majority, and that's 2007, right? These numbers fluctuate. That's 55% of 31,000 firearm-related deaths. I know in the year 2000 it was closer to 55,000 firearm-related deaths, and in subsequent years and earlier years it's gotten up to 75,000. So 2007 seems like it was a relatively slow year for firearm-related homicide and suicide, for it to only be 30,000 total deaths. Intentional deaths. They make a distinction between intentional and unintentional in the statistics, and then they make a distinction between suicide and homicide. So for homicide, we're talking about 12,000 homicide deaths in 2007. 12,000 deaths from approximately 200 million guns. 200 million guns, 300 million people. That's 2 guns for every 3 people in the United States, meaning that in 2007, for every gun that killed someone, 16,000 guns didn't do anything to anybody. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that those 12,000 homicide deaths are somehow legitimate collateral damage or acceptable losses, so that the rest of society can freely own guns. I'm not saying that at all. I'm only suggesting that there are a lot of guns that aren't hurting people. And then when you look at the statistic that says that over like the last, I think since 1967, 1968, something like that, that the vast majority of not only firearm homicide offenders, but also victims, especially since the 1980s, have been males between the ages of 18 and 24. And it's not been until recently that the second place group, which is the 14 to 17 age bracket, has sort of dropped off and allowed the I think it's the next one up, like the 25 to 30 age bracket, to sort of take off a little bit. But that's really interesting to me, that the vast majority of handgun offenders and victims are between the ages of 14 and 24, considering you can't buy a handgun in the United States if you're under the age of 21. that means the vast majority of handgun offenders and victims are owning their guns illegally. Here's a statistic that I thought was particularly interesting. Among juveniles, that's in this case 16, 17, 18-year-olds, serving in correctional facilities like juvenile hall, or if they were tried as an adult in prison, 86% own a gun at some point, 66% acquiring their first gun by age 14. There is also a tendency for juvenile offenders to own many firearms, with 65% owning 3 or more. Juveniles most often acquire guns from family, friends, drug dealers, street contacts. Inner-city youth cite self-protection from enemies as the top reason for carrying a gun. In Rochester, New York, 22% of young males have carried a firearm illegally, though most for only a short period of time. There is little overlap between legal gun ownership and illegal gun carrying among youths. So the majority of gun violence is perpetrated by people who have guns illegally. I don't understand how anyone can suggest that restricting the ownership of guns from law-abiding citizens, from civilians, legal ownership, would somehow affect or impact gun violence in any kind of meaningful way. I don't understand it. I don't see it. I really don't. Now again, I don't buy into the whole God-given right to self-defense or God-given right to own a gun. God did not tell you could own a gun, and God did not make it explicitly clear that you have the right to self-defense. There's a part where Jesus talks about, taking up your sword when you go from town to town preaching, but he also said to turn the other cheek, and he also said if someone tries to steal your jacket, you should give them your shirt. That to me sounds like if someone's trying to steal your TV, you shouldn't shoot them. You should give them your VCR and help them take it out to the car. I don't know. That doesn't sound like self-defense to me. Personally, like I said, I'm still on the fence. I'm not 100% on that one, so we'll see where that goes. But it seems to me like the vast majority of guns that kill people are in the hands of people who should not have them. They're being used to hurt people. Sounds like gang violence. Sounds like drug-related violence. Sounds like crime. People who are already criminals having guns. I don't know. When guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. It sounds like solid logic to me. But I have to say, I think the important thing is to enforce the laws that we already have. I think I saw a statistic that said in 2009 something like 1,400 individuals continued to hold their concealed carry permit despite the fact that they were charged with domestic violence and or had a restraining order against them, which is illegal for you to own a gun if you have a restraining order against you or you've been charged with any kind of domestic violence, even if it's a misdemeanor. I think we would do ourselves good if we could actually get the infrastructure together to enforce the laws that are on the books rather than trying to create larger blanket laws to try to prevent more people from owning guns. That seems like the most sensible thing to me, and I've talked for 8 minutes again. So I'm going to stop now, and I'll see y'all next time.